Democrats flipped an Iowa State Senate seat they had no business flipping. Trump goes even more authoritarian. Gavin Newsom is having a moment. And once we've gone through the politics today, we'll talk about the awful news out of Minnesota. It's not that anything else is more important, but this story is unfolding. So we're going to give it another 45 minutes to make sure that we're discussing it with the most up-to-date information. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, Jason, we are often harping on the doom and gloom in this podcast. And obviously today we were brought even more devastating news, and we'll get to that. But we also overnight got some good news for once politically. And I'll read a tweet. While you were sleeping, Iowa Democrat Catelin Drey flipped a ruby red state Senate seat with a 20-point swing against Trump, breaking the GOP super majority. If you're wondering why Republicans are rigging maps, this is what they're afraid of. So I think this is the second seat to flip, and breaking the supermajority is no small feat.
It's a huge deal to break a supermajority. I mean, for those who are not aware of what that means, it means particularly in Iowa where there's currently a Republican governor. But that Republican governor is not running for re-election, and you might actually get a Democratic governor this next time around. Like, for instance, when the Republicans have a supermajority, it means that if they pass something really, really terrible and then a Democratic governor vetoes it, they could just come in and be like, never mind, your veto doesn't matter. It also matters a lot on things like forcing a vote instead of being able to filibuster something, or in the case of Iowa, a Republican governor being able to appoint whoever they want without Democrats having anything to say about it. So, breaking the supermajority makes Democrats, who are very much the minority party in Iowa, all of a sudden quite relevant again in the legislature. It's a huge deal, particularly when you look at, the actual dynamics of this race. You have, I don't know how to say it. I think it's Catelin Drey. She's the founder of a left-leaning policy group called Moms for Iowa, which supports abortion rights and gun restrictions. And on the campaign trail, she emphasized her background as a mother and called for making childcare more affordable. So this is up in the area where our friend J.D. Schulten, who's been on the show a couple of times, lives. He represents a House seat there, and he's like a little blue dot in a large ocean of red up there in the state House. So this does feel like a big deal.
Yeah, I organized a little bit for Obama when he first ran for president in this area, and it's definitely the kind of area that we were more competitive at various points. We've definitely had some tough years, and this gives us at least some hope that we can turn back the tide. And most importantly, it shows the way forward towards the midterm elections, which is, one could argue about whether a more educated electorate, what happens in special elections, is a false positive for Democrats when it comes to the presidential. Sure, but the same dynamics that are played, special elections often are at play in midterms, where you have more motivated voters and higher information voters turning out. So at least as we fix our gaze on the horizon, the most important test to come in the next 2 years, this is midterm, and this is a good sign for us. Less good sign.
Before we move on, I think just to really dive into the point you just made, I think it's important that people listening to this understand that when we talk about a 20-point swing in that district, she's leading by 11% at the time that it was last reported, which is only 800 votes. So it's important for people to understand what did not happen. I can promise you in that district is like 20% of people who voted for Trump voted for her. That's not what happened. But that doesn't mean, this is meaningless. What is happening is our side is motivated to go out and vote much more than their side is. And that's how you win a district like that, by a margin like that in a special.
Well, some less good news that I didn't lead with deliberately is that we have the frog in the boiling pot of water phenomenon going on in this country right now, where we could spend hours talking about everything that Trump has done. And by the way, there's a drill going on in the apartment next to mine, so I apologize for the noise. So I'll mute myself when I'm not speaking. But Trump is saying the quiet part out loud. Here's a clip of him.
Terms, and will be the big subject of the next election. Think of it. They are, instead of saying, Trump's right about crime. It's really bad in Chicago. You have a guy in Illinois, the governor of Illinois, saying that crime has been much better in Chicago recently, and Trump is a dictator. And most people say, if you call him a dictator, if he stops crime, he can be whatever he wants. I'm not a dictator, by the way, but he can be whatever he wants.
He wants to be a dictator so bad.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely inside of the White House. You know, they are making moves towards something fairly dramatic here. And you know, before the election, people were saying, "Oh, you know, it was hyperbole to call him a fascist, to say that he's authoritarian, etc." Everything this guy is doing is telling us that we're entering worst case scenario territory here, where they're going to try to steal any election they can. Obviously, the stuff on the redistricting is one method to do it, but I mean well beyond that. Like what he tried to do on January 6th, he's going to try to do again. And I think the difference here is that he doesn't have a group of people around him. And I'm no fan of the people in his cabinet in the first term, but there were way more people in that cabinet, like Mattis, who are willing to stick up to him on certain things than now. I don't think there's people in his cabinet who are willing to stick up to him on anything now. And if people aren't convinced of that, here's just a super cut that CNN put together of the cabinet meeting yesterday.
Honor to do this job under the president. It's an honor to do this job under the president's leadership.
You are the single finest candidate since the Nobel this Nobel Award was ever talked about.
Thank you for your leadership, for your boldness, for your clarity, for common sense.
This is just such a great opportunity, really, to recognize your leadership.
It's pretty great to celebrate Labor Day with a builder who loves labor.
You have saved this country by making it the best place in the world to do business again.
You are really the transformational president of the American worker, along with the American flag and President Roosevelt.
Oh, I'm gonna puke.
Well, there was more, actually. One of the labor secretary, I think, said that she was unfurling a banner of Trump on the Labor Department. So we're in Pyongyang territory here.
Can you, I mean, let's just take the politics and the weirdness and the cringe out of it for a moment. Can you imagine, like, you know, you run an organization, like you run a nonprofit media company, you've run many other organizations. I've run organizations, I've run all sorts of things. I've run military units, whatever. Can you imagine having a meeting where you sat there and everybody who spoke had to genuflect and say these things to you and not feeling awkward about it, and not at some point being like, okay, I got it. Like, just that alone is such a window into the weirdness of this just sadly insecure, dangerously insecure personality type. It's crazy.
I don't know what to say about it. Obviously, like, we talk about the cringe here and the optics of it, but there's real substance behind this. And, you know, to pick one example of authoritarian moves he's made this week is that he has indicated that he is going to fire, or is firing, or has fired, depending on how you look at it, one of the Fed governors. My drill is going again, so I'm going to try to wrap this.
I actually can't really hear it.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay.
And the key here is it's unclear whether he can do this or not. He's saying that he has cause. And, you know, the statute around the Fed requires the president to show cause when firing somebody in an independent position like this. And what he is claiming his cause is a so far unsubstantiated claim that this governor committed mortgage fraud, which is their favorite allegation.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, essentially saying that this woman claimed that she, in one application, that she had a primary residence in one state, and then in another state had different primary residence, which ostensibly is apparently what Tulsi Gabbard is alleged to have done as well. This was all before she was appointed.
By the way, from what I've read, is something that is extremely like, I read an article that said, like, if this is something they're going to prosecute, then millions of Americans would be in a lot of trouble.
Well, it's also, one should wonder where they're getting this information from. Here's actually a clip of Trump being asked about mortgage records generally.
Questions about Lisa. You have spoken out very strongly for a long time about what you see as the weaponization of government.
Yeah.
Is your administration weaponizing government by digging into the mortgage records of officials you don't like?
No, they're public. I mean, you can find out those records. You can go check out the records yourself. And you should be doing that job, actually. You wouldn't do that because that's not the kind of reporter you are. But you should be doing that job. I shouldn't have to be doing it. If you did your job properly, we wouldn't have problems like Lisa Cook. Go ahead. You were going to say something? Go. Blue?
If she had voted to lower interest rates?
On national
Please.
security.
I think we have to have lower interest rates, yes.
A follow-up question for you and Madam Attorney General on national security.
So he's wrong about the, surprise. Your mortgage application records are not public. So that is not something a journalist can find. Now, like beyond this, so he made it clear just now, when that follow-up question, that he intends to lower interest rates. Let's put on the screen here, and I'll try to narrate this for the audio audience. Erdogan in Turkey installed loyalists in their equivalent of the Fed and artificially decreased interest rates. And what you will see is that they entered an era of hyperinflation. At a certain point, they were at 80% inflation, which, like, I don't think people even understand what that looks like. So this is the risk when you juice interest rates politically like this. And the Fed up until now had been one of, and I have all my criticisms of the Fed or whatever, but one thing we could say for sure is that it has been politically independent up until now. And it looks like that is, to say it's at risk would be an understatement.
So yes. And so the mortgage accusation is the same thing that he's used to try to go after Adam Schiff, who, and full disclosure, like Adam's a friend. And so that, as is Stacey Abrams, who he's also tried to, like, he launched an investigation of her and a supposed intended prosecution in the State of the Union. That's how we found out about that one. Who he had said both times. Both of those cases make me really angry. And in both cases, while he's campaigning, he was like, we will need to prosecute those people. And then it's just, it's not just, look, in all likelihood, without knowing the evidence on that or on the Fed governor, whose name I can't remember right now, Lisa Cook, maybe, without knowing the evidence, I am confident in saying that given the source, it is likely that were it to reach a jury in all of those cases, it is highly unlikely that there would be a conviction. It's not even all that certain that you would get it past a grand jury, which is super easy to do. And that's not the point. The point is that you're sidelining these people. That's what they're doing. Because when you have something like that, when you have the government coming after you like that, it's financial ruin and it's all of your time. That's what they're after here, is they're trying to harass people into spending all of their money on this because they think that's what was done to Rudy Giuliani. I would argue that Rudy Giuliani, for instance, he broke laws, lots of them, as did Trump, anyway. And now you've got them raiding John Bolton's house to try to find classified information that he would have gotten, based on the statute of limitations after he no longer had a security clearance. So they're trying to say not that he leaked classified information, but that he somehow came into possession of it, which, look, I'm no John Bolton fan. I've disagreed with dang near everything the guy's ever done, including when he went on Fox News after my gun ad in 2016 and claimed that I could see through the blindfold. I've got no reason to be a John Bolton fan, but yet their actions make me feel like if they come up with some little piece of, the lowest level secret classified info or something that was supposedly in the house, I have no reason to not think that it was planted there by them.
Yeah, I'm with you too. We followed John Bolton at the U.S. mission to the UN. And there was still, even though there was Khalilzad was between them, there were a lot of people in that building who knew Bolton really well. And I would say that, who else is not a fan of John Bolton is the entire U.S. mission to the UN career staff. Yeah. He didn't appear to be a great guy, but it's not about whether he's a great guy.
Yes, to being Trump's national security advisor.
But the thing is, it's not. We don't have litmus tests on this stuff, right? So he's obviously being punished because he's criticizing Trump. And the obvious difference, not that people need to hear this, between what Bolton is being accused of, we haven't seen anything yet, And what Trump did with his documents was that there is no evidence that there was any attempt to contact Bolton, find out what he had, get him to turn it over, anything like that. What we had with Trump, or that there was any obstruction of justice. We may learn more, but who knows? With Trump, we know for sure that they tried to contact Trump's team multiple times. They were ignored. They were lied to. There were members of Trump's staff who allegedly were directed to move documents so that the federal government couldn't find them. And that, in the end, we don't even know if Bolton has anything. But what we did know Trump had were like top secret SCI documents, right? So that's the difference.
When you talk to your friends about any of this selective prosecution and investigation and, use of the DOJ for harassment, and if they're saying, well, Biden did some of this or Obama did some of this, here's what I would say to them. I would say, okay, look, here's the difference. When the Biden Justice Department or any Justice Department over the many years, just of your lifetime, when they initially were investigating someone, there were two things that were happening. One, the White House was staying away from it and saying it was an independent investigation. You may not believe that they did, but they were making great pains to at least get the appearance that they were staying away from it. That is definitely not the case here. I mean, you've got J.D. Vance on TV saying, well, here's why we are investigating so and such person. And then the second part is just ask yourself, when somebody, Republican or Democrat, was the subject of an investigation under Biden or under Obama or even under Trump in the first administration, ask yourself, was your first thought, that's probably because of where they stand politically? Or was your first thought, what it usually is? Was your first thought, oh, wow, they probably did something? Because that's usually how we feel when someone's house is raided. And that is the sign of a functioning democracy with a functioning law enforcement apparatus. But if your first thought, regardless of your politics, are I'm not sure about that one, that is not a good sign, and that is us tilting toward authoritarianism.
Well, one somewhat related item here, one could say it's authoritarianism, one could say it's socialism, but the U.S. government now, I guess, allegedly has taken a 10% stake in Intel, and here is Howard Lutnick explaining this stake.
Right? The Biden administration had given $11 billion to Intel, given it to them. Done. Corporate just gift. And you turn that into really, it was like less than 5 minutes of conversation. And Intel agreed to give us 10% of their company, which of course was worth $11 billion. So it's not socialism. This is capitalism. If you give someone $11 billion, who's just building in America, they're not doing something special, they're building in America. And their CEO told the president he didn't need the grant. And you said, well, then why don't we get something for it?
Let me explain something here. From what we understand, this 10% stake comes with the following stipulations. One is that the government, the U.S. federal government, is going to disperse most of the remaining CHIPS money, right, which is at least $6 billion from the CHIPS Act. Now, what we know also is that under the previous obligations from the CHIPS Act, Intel was supposed to build factories in Ohio, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oregon, what they call fabs. And over the course of 2025, they had been dragging their feet on those obligations and looked like they might almost be in default of their CHIPS Act obligations. But in the SEC filings, the second thing that we learned in those filings is that the government, in exchange for this stake, is going to deem Intel as having met its obligations under the CHIPS Act. So what does this all mean? It means that we're actually taking a stake in a company and we're giving them the CHIPS Act funding without requiring them to build anything in this country. We're actually absolving them of the previous responsibility they had to build in this country.
Yeah, but if you were supposed to get one of those jobs, Ravi, I'm sure you are reassured knowing that the federal government has a stake. And I'm sure you have every confidence to believe that that money is going to come back to you and not be, a rebate in the form, it's certainly not going to go to people who, like, I don't know, have C-level suite jobs at places like Intel. That certainly won't be what happens. I don't know. I don't know if it's socialism, but it does feel centrally planned like communism. I mean,
Yeah, somebody was telling me that Bernie is for this. I haven't independently corroborated that, but like, look, like this is how Mark Cuban was talking about the tariffs too, which is that they're corporate taxes, etc. I just think, look at the fine print. Like, if this is right, and I credit Pete Harrell for this, who put out these tweets, a friend of mine from law school. Like, if Pete is right that what we get is a stake in a company that was already struggling, right, that could be bankrupt at some point, and in exchange for that stake, we're relieving them of their responsibility that we are paying them for to build factories and to make jobs in the United States. And what kind of deal is this?
I try to run everything through. So, people are fond of saying about things that Trump does, well, what if Obama had done that? What if Biden had done that? And we're always talking about things that are objectively terrible and not things that are sort of, cases of first impression or policy decisions or whatever. I try and run the reverse test. I try and look through the other end of the telescope and say, okay, what if a Democratic president, what if Obama had done this? What would my first instinct be? And depending on how you package it, I think if you're being honest, your first instinct might be, oh, okay, we're not just giving corporate welfare out, we're trying to get something for it. And I think it's important to say that. But the difference here is twofold. One, I'll be honest, I just don't trust Trump to do anything other than just do handouts to powerful people and to feel like he's, playing with other people's money and still playing business and that kind of thing. And then the other part of it is just what you said, which is it doesn't make a lot of sense. The logic, I mean, like what Lutnick just said there was that the CEO of Intel said, we don't even need the $11 billion. And then Trump said, okay, then we'll take a stake in the company. Why didn't Trump say, then give it back? That's what I don't understand. If the point is for the government to have $11 billion that it didn't have, thanks to, in their world and their version of this, that it didn't have because of a decision made by the previous administration, then why not just say, okay, give it back? Why would you say, well, how about you give us part of the company and we act like you met all of the obligations under which you received the money? I don't understand.
Yeah, Intel wins. Like, it's almost like this is actually a corporate handout, as I see it. Like, people are looking at this like it's like, oh yeah, this is him sticking it to the companies or whatever. Like, I think Intel played us. This is a company that maybe couldn't survive the next 10 years, right? And they just got a huge win from the administration, and Lord knows whether this 10% stake will even last.
I mean, not to mention the fact that now 10% of the company is owned by an entity that will never sell.
Yeah, and too big to fail, that
right.
kind of
I mean,
well, you also are now going to interject Trump and his ego into market forces. So he's going to try to do things like prop up this company, because if it fails, it makes him look bad.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, one more thing here before we take a break. Jason, I'm sure you have been following the sort of week plus that Gavin Newsom's been having.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's been hard to avoid if you're a progressive and have a social media account.
Well, yeah. So you're a little bit more in the spaces that Newsom has been taking to. How would you summarize to a listener who's been in a cave for the past week, like what Newsom's been up to?
He's basically just doing a parody of Donald Trump. He's just coming at Donald Trump from the left and doing it in a Donald Trump voice and just basically pretending to be Trump, basically just taking every silly move that Trump has done on social media, from all caps crazy things to say to weird AI generated images of himself like as a hero, and just doing it all and doing it like, but doing it all. It's tongue in cheek, but like in on the gag, not acknowledging the gag, and doing it like it's a straight play, like it's very dry.
Yeah, and this seems to be a big conversation in a lot of circles of Democrats, and it takes a couple of different forms. Form A is he the guy? Does this mean that he's like, he's shown that he should be the front runner for president? And there is a poll that shows that he has, made up considerable ground in polling, super early primary polling. He's now at 19%, up from 11% in June and 5% in March, in polling for, way too early polling for the primary. So that's one form this argument takes. The other form it takes, and I've seen a lot of debates to this effect, especially in a lot of like liberal podcasts and whatnot, is, are we stooping to a level like the Trump level, yada, yada, yada? And are we embracing the coarseness of our politics? So those are two frames. And I'll just give you my quick take on all of it together before hearing yours, which is, number one, I've never been a Gavin Newsom guy. There's a lot of things about his governance of California I didn't love, especially if you look at his past record, nor have I loved his style. And I just have a hard time believing that that particular profile is going to be what we're going to want to put out there in the next election. All of that being said, what he's doing on redistricting is absolutely necessary. And I totally support him on that. Number two, although his particular style of online engagement wouldn't be my choice, so many progressives and Democrats want to see people fighting and winning people's attention. And that although I have lots of questions when we get to a primary as to whether he would be the right guy or not, I choose not to participate in that discussion anymore about who should be the nominee, and instead say, hey, we're all on the same team here. And as much as I have my disagreements with things that Newsom has done, I welcome his energy. I welcome his substantive fight on redistricting, and I want to see more Democrats fight back in whatever way is authentic to them. And he certainly seems to be having a good time while also getting under the skin of people who are doing really bad things. And so I'm mostly for it.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. Certainly the redistricting piece, I think he's doing it right. And I think this is an important thing for us to discuss, that when you're sitting around with your maybe persuadable or not persuadable friends or relatives talking about the gerrymandering fight in the country, I think it's important to talk about what's happening here, right? Texas, which was already gerrymandered, is like, Donald Trump asked us to get more Republican seats. We're just passing an even more gerrymandered map, and we're going to get to 5 additional Republican seats. California, which is pretty well Texas's, counterpart politically and somewhat geographically in the country. I mean, they're always competing over the same business, everything else. California had a map that was probably the model in the country between the jungle primaries, the way they do them, and the independent redistricting they do, actually had the model for an unbiased system, as close as you can get to a system that will give you a congressional representation that comes as close as possible to actually representing every Californian and not just one party. California then says, okay, you did this thing to gum up democracy in this country even worse. We are going to have a proportional response to that, in which we ask the people of California first if we can do it. And even though we could, make it an arms race and go much further than you, we're going to undo our really outstanding nonpartisan system, but only for the limited purpose of responding to yours, to even things back out, to say, you messed up the system by 5 seats. We will meet your 5 seats, rather than being like, hey, every seat in California is now going to be a Democrat. That's important, and I think people should talk about it that way. As for Newsom, who I think is handling that very, very well, let's look at this let's go back several months, okay? Trump wins the election, and it's very clear, and I say this as a former politician and not as someone who is judging him for it. I'm just being realistic about it. Several months ago, Gavin Newsom said, okay, it's probably time for me to get ready to run for president. What's the first thing I need to do? I need to raise my profile. I didn't run for president the last time around or the time before that. Not everybody knows me, and they have a certain idea as to who I am. I have a certain, I have a set of skills here that I'm pretty good on my feet, that kind of thing. How am I going to raise that profile? And I think he basically got it wrong the first time around. What he did is he started going direct, and what he wanted to demonstrate was, even though I'm the governor of California, I can engage with the right wing, and I can do it in a way that brings people together. And he did it wrong. I think he just made a tactical error. He decided to go to the hard right, and a lot of people got mad that he was platforming them. And the people who got really mad were, frankly, the online left. And we say the online left in a dismissive way, but increasingly the online left or the online right has an awful lot to do with generating the momentum and the votes and the money necessary to win a nationwide primary. And so that was a miscalculation. And he said, okay, I'm going to reset. And I don't have any special inside information. This is just me saying what I think happened. So I don't want people to think like I know this, but this is what I think. And then they said, let's reset. Let's try something different. Right. So then he started doing what Pete had already been doing and a few others. And he started going on podcasts that weren't, explicitly right wing, but might be conservative leaning because of their audience or because of their host, but really had some other purpose. They were comedy podcasts or, cultural podcasts, that kind of thing. And because he's a pretty good politician, he's a charming guy and seems to be, in these one-on-one engagements, pretty likable, and have like a real story to tell. That was starting to go pretty well. And then they said, let's up that. Let's make sure the online left really, really knows us. And also sort of the cable news left, because it penetrated that world because it was so successful. And they said, let's just full on parody Donald Trump. And let's do it as a gag where we kind of don't acknowledge it, which is really smart. I mean, from a comedic standpoint, like, we're going to do this thing, but we're not going to do it with side eye. We're not going to do it tongue in cheek. We're going to do it as if it's a straight bit. Right.
Yeah.
And that's really working. Right. Now, with all that said, those two things, not strategy 1, but strategy 2 and strategy 3, are very smart for the moment tactics to raise your profile and get you to be, because the poll you just cited, let's be real, that's a name recognition poll, right? If you look at the other folks in it, so just in order, you got Kamala Harris, former vice president, most recent nominee, and then followed by the way, someone else. But after that, you've got Newsom now, who passed Pete, and then after that it's AOC. Okay, that is basically who are the Democratic potential candidates who who they are. I'm not dismissing it. That's important. If you want to run for president in a few years, you got to be in that poll. So I say all this to say, when people are assessing, is this a smart strategy? Is this a way to win the election? That is an irrelevant question. That's not what Gavin Newsom is trying to do right now. Gavin Newsom is trying to make sure that you know who he is. And that is working. You can assess that and say, well, that'll never work in the general. And I will say to you, this is not how he would run in a general. It's probably not even how he would run in a primary. But in, end of summer 2025 for a 2028 presidential election, it's probably a pretty smart thing to do. And you could assess to some degree his political acumen based on the fact that he got it wrong, then he adjusted, he's starting to get it right. Good for him.
Yeah, and it used to be, as you know, that what people would do around this time is take a couple, not so discreet trips to the early states. People would write about it. You'd shake some hands. You'd meet
and there are people doing that right now.
Yeah, and
including our friend Ruben Gallego.
Yeah, that stuff is important, but I think what we might be witnessing is a different way of building momentum and seeding the grounds for a run, and or just running straight up. Like I imagine in Pete's world, in Gavin's world, a lot of them are starting to function like presidential campaigns now in more material ways than even these exploratory
staffing up. I mean, I've done it. They're staffing up. They're having constant meetings about this. I mean, honestly, at this point, the governor of California is, and I don't say this in a bad way, this is the reality of how it works. The governor of California is a presidential candidate governing California. That's how it works.
Yeah. And I think in this case, I'm going to do what I said I wouldn't do, which is if you start to think about, well, what's the through line from here through the midterm into the primary? I think what we're going to get is people's campaigns becoming their message, right? So Gavin is communicating something about himself here through the way he's campaigning. And I think it's actually, you play the cards you're dealt, right? Like, I don't think like sincerity and kindness in the way that Mayor Pete might run on, for example.
They're not going to run the same campaign. They're not the same person.
Yeah. And so I think we will be well served if Gavin plays his cards to the maximum advantage that he's got. Pete runs that sincere Bartlett style campaign, and he'd be banking on, and they're each banking on different things. Like Gavin Newsom will be banking on the fact that people want somebody who's tough and who's going to take a fight to Trump and out Trump and his people and get under their skin and all that kind of stuff and scratch that itch. People like Pete will be testing a different philosophy, which is the sort of Axelrod theory that like the electorate swings back and they want you to remedy things about the person who's leaving. So they would want somebody sincere who's going to build back the institutions, et cetera, instead of using them to dominate his opponents. And then obviously you're going to get all kinds of different kinds of people. Maybe a Mark Cuban who, has business acumen, or Gretchen Whitmer, who's showing people that, Midwest values and strong state governance. And, in her case, I think like somewhat working with Trump and trying to do it discreetly. So there are going to be a lot of different theories, I guess is my point. One other thing that's going on here.
Can I say, before you finish that point, the smartest thing I've heard anybody say about the 2028 presidential Democratic primary race is you, who said that ultimately the nominee, particularly if they have a chance to win, will probably be somebody who runs not just against the Republicans, but also against the party, the Democratic establishment. And which doesn't mean, I don't think you mean, that they are going to therefore run with a bunch of policy positions that are antithetical to the left, but rather just against the establishment, recognizing that none of it's working. And if you think about the people who have the opportunity to do that, there are actually many of them, not all of them, but there are many of them who can credibly do that. And it's yet to be seen whether Gavin Newsom can credibly do that. I mean, I think coming from the West Coast and having not been a senator, I think it does make it a little easier. But what it all means to me is that if Bernie Sanders were 20 years younger, he would be the obvious prohibitive frontrunner and probably our best candidate right now for that reason.
Yeah, the thing about Bernie is he's never been my style, like policy wise. A lot of things he advocates for, I've generally been against, although I've gotten closer to him on certain things like healthcare for sure over the years. But I'm not a bespoke voter. Like, I'm not like, I need the person who's going to match my views. I want the person who's going to win. And that's generally how I view primaries nowadays. I think if you were to ask me 10, 15 years ago, I would think of him differently. Well, let's take a break. And before we go, if you haven't yet subscribed to Where the Schools Went, this is a podcast I've been putting out where now this week is 20 years since Hurricane Katrina. And over the course of a few episodes in partnership with the Midas Touch Network, I have been chronicling the 20 years since Katrina, specifically of what happened to the schools. And I spoke to over 50 people, both critics and champions of changes that have happened down there. And we've been earning huge plaudits from people on all sides of the debate down there. So check it out, Where the Schools Went, wherever you get your podcasts. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some interesting comments from Joe Rogan, some weird U.S. espionage activities going on in a very unlikely place. Some media members, both sides, saying the redistricting fight. Secretary Duffy inadvertently championing a Biden policy, some AI stuff, and maybe some tariff stuff when we get back. When we relaunched this podcast, it seemed like we had to figure it all out on our own. Scripts, setups, filming schedules, logos. It was super overwhelming. And every day it seemed like we had a new decision that needed a new answer. And when you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. The Midas Touch Network is proud to have their own store using the Shopify platform. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style, accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Now get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. You can easily create email and social media campaigns whenever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing, returns, and beyond. Turn your business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/majority. Go to shopify.com/majority, shopify.com/majority. All right. Well, in every episode, I like to check in with the sort of alternative media sphere, the right-wing media sphere. And here's one clip that really stood out to me. This is Joe Rogan and this comedian Dave Smith talking about Trump's 2020 election claims.
So I agree with all of that. I'm just saying, like, once you've made these statements and your administration is in, no, I remember it was one of the most interesting parts of your podcast with him was like when you asked him about that, it was like he really didn't have anything to back it up.
If that was you or if that was me, I mean, if there was some reason why I knew that they did something and I could give you all the facts, I would have that ready for anybody because for 4 fucking years, they've been telling him he's crazy for questioning the election.
Yeah.
So after 4 years, I'd have a fucking tight 10 minutes on the election where I could just rattle off at you and rock your world with it. Like these are the facts, Jack, that you were robbed.
Yeah. So, you know, there's 2 parts of my brain. One is, well, you had the guy making these claims on your show and you did a little to push back, but not that much. But then there's another part of me, which is like, okay, accept where you are today, have him.
And you voted for him and you told everybody you're voting for him. But anyway, not you, Rogan. Everybody mad at you. It
reminds me of Andrew Schultz, you know, one of the clips that we were playing. And I can't remember if I mentioned this at the time, but I've been reflecting on it since. And I was like, you know, here was Schultz talking about how Trump lied to him. And I'm like, well, you spoke at the Madison Square Garden rally where he talked about Haitians eating cats and dogs. So maybe you had a little evidence that this guy wasn't completely trustworthy. But then you got to be like, all right, welcome people into the coalition.
Right, exactly.
I'm not sure Rogan's in it, but we don't want to punish him for now saying the right thing. So I think that's the world I choose to live in, which is I welcome the change.
Well, it's just one of those things where anybody who's ever been married understands that, you know, your first like 10, maybe even 15 years of marriage, you get in an argument with your spouse and you stew about it and you stew about it. And you put a lot of energy into trying to win that argument, you know, and you go into the other room and you start, or even maybe you spend half a day thinking about things and you spin yourself up. And then by the time you get back to talking to them, you're so fired up that like whatever you're going to say is only going to make things worse. And then, you know, we just celebrated 22 years of marriage, 26 years together. And I'm at the point now where, and she is too, where we get in an argument. I go into the other room and I just go, all right, I could try and come up with all the things I could say to try to win this argument, but ultimately nobody's going to win. And I'm just going to make it go longer. So what do we say to make everybody happy again without, you know, you don't have to be like, you're right when you don't think they're right. It's just, hey, I'm going to acknowledge your feelings and we're going to be good again. And that's how you get to a happy marriage. And at the end of the day, America is trying to be a marriage. And if you're going to spend all your time so mad at what a person did in the past that you can't build any kind of relationship, well, you're never going to win them over. So that's how you got to approach it. I also, by the way, think that the Schultzes and the Rogans and all over the world, this is just more evidence that the Epstein conundrum for Trump is a huge problem because it sort of bursts this bubble of invincibility that he has on being able to lie about everything and makes them go like, not just literally saying, maybe we should reconsider everything from before, but also having an audience that is now falling out of love with him to some extent. Not all of Rogan's audience. There are plenty of people in Rogan's audience who voted for Harris. But sort of that MAGA base being like kind of moving on from him in a way, in some cases, to where you can now criticize him and not lose them.
Right. Well, in a bizarre story, this is breaking right before we recorded. Denmark has summoned the top U.S. diplomat. Let me say that again. Denmark has summoned the top U.S. diplomat after national broadcaster there reported that at least 3 people with connections to Donald Trump have been carrying out covert influence operations in Greenland. This is not a fake headline.
Grandpa, what did you do in the service of your country? Well, I risked life and limb in that place on the map that is weirdly big on a globe that you don't know anything else about, to try and make it so that a former president, maybe former by then, could build a golf course there, or maybe even so that we could vacation there without using a passport. Oh, thank you, Grandpa.
If you put the past few weeks together, we roll out the red carpet for Putin, who Trump just can't stop saying great things about. Meanwhile, and he also just openly contradicts and attacks our own intelligence community for pointing out that Russia was meddling in our elections. Meanwhile, we are interfering in the affairs of Denmark. Like what? This is where we are.
By the way, it's very interesting how it's worded. At least 3 people with connections to President Donald Trump, which means it doesn't appear that this is like a sort of a sanctioned covert services thing so much as, look, here's what I think it probably is. It's probably 3 doofuses.
Yeah, like whoever the new Roger Stone is.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
Don. I mean, it's like, that's what, I mean, it's the same stuff. Who did we have before? Remember we had those 2 weird Russian guys who, we had a guy whose name was like Smirnov, actually working here to try to influence ours. I mean, and he was a Trump affiliated guy. Then you had that weird, Giuliani doing it at one point. I mean, we're not sending our best, Ravi. Is my point.
Well, I'm trying to get through a little lightning round here, but these are too interesting, these stories.
Yeah.
But this one I think we could dispatch with fast. Chuck Todd had a tweet that caught my attention, so much so that I sent out my monthly tweet in response to this. I said, this is what he said. He said, Trump hasn't just changed the GOP and made them principleless, but he's done it to the left. Not sure how the answer to GOP disenfranchising voters in red states is to do the same to voters in blue states. I replied saying something the equivalent of, but what do you do? Like, are you just going to unilaterally disarm and then never get power again? Like, and I reminded Chuck, not that he read my tweet, that
he probably did.
2 things are true. One is the Democrats, when they took power in the House, tried to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would have banned partisan gerrymandering. And 2, Democratic appointees to the Supreme Court want to make partisan gerrymandering illegal.
Look, when there's the old expression, if you wrestle with a pig, you're going to get muddy or whatever it is, which is not the same as when your house is attacked by a pig. It's like how nice it must be to be the likes of Chuck Todd, who can, pretend to be above the fray and act like we're doing the same thing as them, when, as I outlined earlier, it is a proportional response, right? It's like saying during, when Saddam Hussein was still in power, and Bill Clinton would occasionally send because they would violate the no-fly zone, they would do all sorts of human rights violations, or they would look like they were trying to work toward weapons, and then an F-15 would fly out of Kuwait and would drop bombs on a very specific target for a very limited purpose in Iraq. This is like saying, well, Saddam Hussein and Bill Clinton, exactly the same, both making war on Iraqis. Like, no, they're not the same. It's a proportional response to try and right the system that they're breaking. And Chuck Todd knows that.
Well, a couple other quick
lightning round is not working. I have too much to say.
No. We got a couple of quick items here. One is this is, I think, from Shane Goldmacher. But the AI industry is preparing for 2026 combat. Andreessen Horowitz has dropped 50 million. Greg and Anna Brockman, 50 million. I think those are open AI people. Meta, tens of millions. And these are just early investments in pro AI super PACs. The playbook here is the crypto money that people aren't really paying attention to this, but even Democrats are afraid of the crypto money. And they've really succeeded in intimidating the hell out of people on both sides of the aisle to support whatever their agendas are. And honestly, like, sometimes I'm for it, whatever they're going for, sometimes against it. But what I don't love is these particular tactics, especially coming from people who, especially like Andreessen, who have no respect for our democracy whatsoever and are kind of part of this nihilistic Peter Thiel style, burn the house down and move to New Zealand in our bunker type of mentality. So I worry about the worldviews of the people who are pushing this kind of stuff.
There is a certain brand of libertarianism that is kind of scary that comes out of Silicon Valley sometimes, that started out as a more liberal version, and it has become, now that Silicon Valley is not what's going on there is now truly not new. Like, we're in the second generation of wealth out there, of this kind of wealth, this sort of tech, wealth. And it's getting more toward a typical conservatism, like rich conservative, country club or conservatism. That's like, look, if other people have the incredible faculties and incredible abilities that we have, then they'll be fine. I just worked really hard. And it's like, okay, well, you had some advantages. And also, maybe you are a genius, but not everyone is. And it'd be nice if you think that way. It's incredible how often you sit down with folks, and not everybody. I got lots of friends in Silicon Valley who don't fit this, but it is interesting how often you'll sit down with people in Silicon Valley and you'll be talking about a cause or some effort that needs to be done. And they're such quants that it's very difficult for them to grasp sort of the qualitative humanitarian purpose of things. And it's like, if the numbers aren't there, I mean, the numbers are like their religion, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, they're also like, a lot of these guys, the All In podcast, I think, is the most extreme example of this, have become these like pseudo intellectuals who like macro bullshit. So they'll throw around all these theories, like, that sound really smart, Mark Andreessen's, and he'll talk really fast. But then if you slow it down and you think about what are they saying, it's almost always crazy shit and not really well thought out.
And it all serves to justify making,
it all heads in one direction.
They never have to inconvenience themselves, right? I mean, and right. They're the saviors.
Yeah, it's not like they're, like an equivalent that would go the other way is like Michael Lewis, a writer I really love, but who, he wrote these books about the federal government, right? Now, you never see, and like, he'll basically be like, I found this guy who designed this like technology that can judge where the currents are going. So if somebody gets thrown overboard in
I listened to that one. That one is great.
Yeah. You don't hear Mark Andreessen in his endless font of, pseudo intellectualism, where he can pull anecdotes out of his ass to justify anything that's in the direction of more techno libertarianism. He's never been like, what, I read this really thoughtful book by Michael Lewis, and there are actually like amazing civil servants that we need to protect. And perhaps my buddy, who I invest in all his companies, Elon Musk, when he takes a literal, what did he take? What is the thing? The chainsaw to the federal government. Perhaps could be taking down some people that are really important. And Mark Andreessen, somebody who benefited from federal investment in higher education when I was at the University of Illinois and was able to toy around with some early versions of the internet, am appalled by this.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow he doesn't give us that version of it. So, okay, one last quick thing, and I'll just dispense with this quickly. 50%, let me say that again, 50% tariffs on India go into effect today. Now, there are also 50% tariffs on Brazil, which one should, we've talked about this before. One should go down that rabbit hole again as to why Brazil has 50% tariffs. And it's alone an impeachable act, what happened there in the way.
I don't remember.
Well, so basically Trump was attaching Bolsonaro's case in Brazil and saying that he was ratcheting up the tariffs because he wanted them to free Bolsonaro.
That's right.
So like that alone would be the scandal of any normal president's term. But it just comes and goes. But the thing about this India thing that people need to keep in mind, and we could do a whole episode about this, is Trump's stated goal with all this stuff was that he was going to weaken China, right? And now he's inflicting more tariffs on India. Well, what's going on today? India and China are meeting today. Now, people who don't know a lot about that region might not think that's a big deal, but that is a huge deal. These are two countries that hate each other and don't meet very often. And now they're meeting and discussing with other countries. economic cooperation. And there are leaders like Pakistan at this meeting, Iran. These are not all the friendliest countries with each other, but they're all looking around and saying, you know what? We may have to start working together.
Guess he's brought India and Pakistan together. That's why he's going for that Nobel Prize.
Honestly, he might deserve it for this inadvertently. All right, Jason, how should we handle what happened today?
All right. So here's what the most up-to-date news is that in this shooting this morning in Minnesota at a Catholic school in Minneapolis, the Annunciation Catholic School, where it's the first week of school. The kids were all in mass and they were praying. At least 2 children were killed in a shooting. The mass was to mark the first week of school. The shooter is dead. Law enforcement officials have said children ages 6 to 14 are being treated for injuries at a Minneapolis area healthcare system, with some in critical condition. And officials say the shooter fired through windows at people sitting in pews, injuring at least 17. That's what we know so far. I think we have the clip. I think the best thing we can do right here is hear from a great guy who I've spent a little bit of time around, Mayor Jacob Frey, who spoke about this morning. This is the Minneapolis mayor.
These were Minneapolis families. These were American families. And the amount of pain that they are suffering right now is extraordinary. And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church. These are kids that should be learning with their friends. They should be playing on the playground. They should be able to go to school or church in peace without the fear or risk of violence, and their parents should have the same kind of assurance. These are the sort of basic assurances that every family should have, every step of the day, regardless of where they are in our country.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say, really, Ravi, other than it's so frustrating. Because the instinct at times like this for people who are politically engaged is to try to figure out what can we do to convince the rest of the country to do something about guns and to finally take action. And what is so, I think, especially disheartening about it is there's actually not a lot more that needs to be done to convince the average person that we need common sense gun reform, that we need background checks, that we need an assault weapons ban. Like, the vast majority of Americans support those things. And in fact, very close to a majority, I mean, certainly on background checks, a majority in, I think, probably every state support it. And we're getting closer and closer all the time when it comes to assault weapons ban. Now, we don't know what weapon was used, but it really just is as simple as it coming down to we need the right people to be in charge so they can pass laws that change these things, because they are changeable.
Yeah. Well, amen to that.
I'll say one other thing about this, which is that a couple weeks ago, there's an organization here in Kansas City called American Public Square, which invited David Hogg, who a lot of people, and I think David's going to come on the show in the near future. People are probably familiar with David. He was vice chair of the DNC, but the way you became familiar with David was that he became very well known that he went to Parkland. He went to Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. He lost many of his classmates in that shooting, and was interviewed immediately afterwards, and it went viral for how he talked about it. And he was like, why is no one doing anything about this? Why are we just accepting this? And then he went to Harvard, and now he's got an organization called Leaders We Deserve, and he's going across the country trying to get more young people elected to office. And during our discussion on stage and also backstage beforehand, David said something, and I'd heard it before, but it really sort of hit me when David was talking about it, because what he was saying was like, look, all the generations above his, millennial, like you and I, the millennial generation, and then the generations above us, that we have reasons in our memories, in our lives, we have memories that point to reasons for optimism and hope about America. And what that does is it makes us more inclined towards some degree of patience on all this stuff, but as a result, more inclined toward accepting incrementalism. The idea of like, hey, we're going to take our wins so we can get them. We're not going to, campaign for big, bold policies. We're going to campaign for things that we think we could get done. And we're much more interested in like trying to convince the other side, that kind of thing. And his point was like, look, I'm 25 years old. I'm an adult at this point. I've lived through some things. I'm not old enough to remember 9/11, which means I don't remember the world before 9/11, which means my generation, what he was saying was my generation hasn't grown up with any of that evidence of when people say Americans have more that unites us than divides us, and we just need to come together about what makes us American. He's like, we've literally never seen that. We've seen war. We've been shot at in our schools, and it keeps happening and nobody does anything about it. Things get more and more unaffordable. We've had an economic crisis. We can't afford anything. And now we've got, we're supporting what Israel is doing in Gaza, and we don't understand why. We don't understand why any of this is happening. And now we're adults. So now it's not like, why are the adults doing this? It's like, why are we allowing this to happen? And it was just a really good point. And I just think about like, yeah, you and I are probably, I don't know if we're moderate, but we're more inclined toward maybe tactical, occasional incrementalism on things. And I just want to say, like, I completely get why things like this happening in the news mean that if you're Generation Z, you're looking at this going, what are you talking about doing little things? Everything needs to change.
Yeah.
And I just really get that.
Yeah. And I think like, I hope he comes on because I think that there is, I've heard and I tend to like accept in some ways the moderate label at times, although longtime listeners will know I'm fairly radical when it comes to certain things, like when it comes to education, for example. And part of my discussion cross-generationally I would love to have with somebody like David is what are you taking as your given on certain things? Like a good example is I tend to think, for example, on education. This is part of what I was working on in New Orleans, and I had a good conversation with the former UK Minister of Education, the equivalent of their Secretary of Education this week that I'm putting out today, where they did some big things over there. New Orleans had some big things. Long-time listeners will know my views on these things. In the Democratic Party, and including people like David, tend to be status quo oriented when it comes to the functioning of the education system, while they want bigger changes to things around safety and things like that. And where I would want to push them is like, hey, I want to meet you there. Let's be radical together. Obviously, we want to be responsibly radical. Mm-hmm. Like you could just say burn everything down, and that's radical. That's MAGA. So like let's actually use evidence-based, passionate advocacy for change. But like, you went to a certain kind of school, David. Let's look at some other schools. Let's look at the kid in North Nashville that I used to serve. Let's look at the kids in New Orleans. Let's look at the kids in the South Bronx and say, like, is the message of the party reaching them, and why not? And is their lived reality being spoken to? And could that have something to do why we're underperforming with some of those constituencies? That's where I'd want him to get more radical too.
Yeah, you've probably looked into his views on education. I have not, but it was a very interesting conversation. I mean, he's, just if you're like, hey man, see it from our perspective. Like, you all remember when people in this country got along and there was compromise, and you remember a time, like you remember post 9/11 when we all seemed to be on the same side for a couple of years. And he's just like, we've literally never seen that happen. I mean, like, look at what could have been the equivalent of that COVID. It was like, what, 3-4 days where everybody was like hunkering down together. And then Trump came out and was like, we're pitting these people against these people. And it became political, whether you wore a mask. And so it's like,
but I think he's winning this argument. He needs to do what we just did earlier, which is take yes for an answer. I think like the Midas audience, if I were to guess, is probably on average in their 30s and 40s, if I were to guess, right? And they're probably around our age. And I think it skews female in those age groups. I bet most of the people listening to this podcast, although not in the same generation as David, are 1,000% on the same page.
I think you're right.
Of like the ruthlessness that they need to bring. Probably more so than me as the host, to be honest. I think
the difference is like, I think that, somebody in their 50s or 60s who may believe in the same values and want the same things is also really likely to be like, but I don't know if we can win that way. And I think what David is saying, what his generation is feeling is like, you haven't been winning, because even when you've been winning, nothing's been changing. So like, we're not going to consider that metric. We're playing the long game, and we're trying to change the entire conversation and win over this country toward actually doing stuff. And so I do look forward to the conversation. And the way I felt about this shooting today, which I think any sane person feels horrible when this stuff happens. And I don't know if I tend to process these things for whatever reason, these things are hard for me to shake. And so I found myself thinking about that a lot today. So,
yeah.
All right.
Well, one for us.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, on the schools front, so I started a Substack just a week or two ago, so people can check it out at realravigupta.substack.com. And I think Jeremy could throw that in the show notes. You can click on it, and I'm pretty easy to find on that. And actually, on the subject of schools, for longtime listeners will know I used to be a school principal. And the post I put up today was this funny story about this student I had named Edmund. And Edmund was this kid who would slouch. He would slouch so much that he'd almost be on the floor in class, wouldn't pay attention, wouldn't put in a lot of effort. But he had these maddeningly high diagnostic scores, so you knew he had the ability. He just was choosing not to participate. And teachers tried all kinds of things. And then finally, I get, this teacher named Miss I pulls him out into the hallway and is like trying to give me give him a pep talk, which was like my specialty as a school principal. And so I stand up with him, and I'm like, all right, let's like meet each other's posture. And I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, Edmund, what do I know about Edmund? And I'm like, all right, I know he's obsessed with these manga comic books, like anime. He likes comic books and superheroes and all this. And he's got like this secret aptitude that he doesn't want people to know about. So I look at him and I say, hey, Edmund, are you familiar with Clark Kent? And he's like, of course, Superman. And I was like, I know that the person I see in that classroom who's slouching on the floor, that's not the real you. And he goes, it's not? I was like, yeah. I was like, of course not. I know that's not you. I was like, but we need to come up with an alias, Clark Kent, Superman style, for who you really are. And he goes, what do you mean? And I was like, you could just pick one right now. Just tell me who you want to be. And without even a millisecond of hesitation, he goes, I'm Rick Narsh. He just had a name, immediately had a name. So in the hallway, I look at him, and I like in my head, I was like deadly serious. Like, I wasn't laughing, although inside the fact that he had that so fast was making me laugh. I look him in the eyes and I say, all right, that's a solid name. I was like, I'm going to send you back in the classroom. And then I kind of give him a checklist. I was like, let's agree on who Rick Narsh is. And I swear to God, Scouts honor, and I put this in there, anybody who's on my founding team in Nashville Prep, they will tell you they know Rick Narsh. That kid turned around immediately.
That's so cool.
And I write all about what that means. And like, what does it mean? Like, how do people change? How do you know people can change? And what are the preconditions for it, and how people can learn from an experience like that. And that's the kind of stuff I write about in that Substack, usually not politics. So it's all about the kind of learning and lifelong learning type of stuff that I write about. So realravigupta.substack.com.
So did he start going by Rick Narsh, or was it sort of like Rick Narsh was Superman and he was Edmund was Clark Kent?
So the typical way this would manifest itself is I would see him like, I was in the classrooms nonstop. So like if I saw him even slouching a little bit, I would just whisper in his ear, Rick Narsh. Or like the funniest moments where we would have a conversation and he would say to me, I know that's not Rick Narsh behavior, stuff like that. Now, at a certain point, it was a small community. Yeah. So people started to call him Rick Narsh. So even other students and stuff would call him Rick Narsh. People didn't fully understand the context. Obviously, I told all the teachers. And then at a certain point, I told his parents too, who thought it was funny. But his dad was a barber. He had a great sense of humor. But they...
really cool.
But but it shows that sometimes, and I write about this, like sometimes people are raring like a coiled spring. They want to change, but in a school setting, things get so negative. And this is true of a lot of like relationships that have gone a certain way. It's like people have these, like, if you want to change, but people have this notion of you, it makes it hard to change because you feel like you're being judged, and you feel like no matter what you do, people are going to see you a certain way. So in many ways, I see this with kids. They lean even more into the way people think about them, even if they don't want to accept that identity. And I don't fully understand how that works, but I know I had that when I was a kid. And so that's why I think you have to give kids a permission structure and like a door to walk through and say, okay, and maybe there's a political parable to this too, where like you have to open a door and say, I see you for who you really are. I'm going to be optimistic about you, and you're going to walk through this door. And this is like a particularly powerful example of that.
That's awesome. I cannot top that, and I won't try. I love the Rick Narsh story. And
by the way, shout out, unrelated to Austin, I hope I remember your name correctly, a young man who I was at the US Open 2 days ago, and there was a guy sitting next to me. He goes, "Are you this?" And this happens to you all the time. This never happens to me. He goes, "Are you Ravi Gupta?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like waiting for like a swing, and he was like, "I'm a majority 54 listener." I was like, and he worked for the U.S. Open. He was sitting there.
That's cool.
So that was cool. I was very excited about that.
It is. It
very
is,
nice guy.
Well, I mean, now that we do this YouTube thing, I would imagine this is happening more and more, that people actually recognize you by your face, so, and not just your voice. So, all right. Thanks everybody for listening. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta everywhere. You can find me at Jason Kander everywhere. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.